Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Cook County Board of Commissioners regular meeting today, Tuesday, July 11th. And if we'd stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So as we look at our agenda, are there any changes or adjustments to the agenda today? Any adjustments?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner White. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We have an agenda. At this time, we have our public comment period, which is an opportunity for citizens to appear before the county board regarding any matter of concern. When invited to speak, please speak into the microphone for clarity, sign in, and state your name, address, and the topic you're addressing. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak this morning? Pat, why don't you come forward?
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. I'm just going to give you my prepared remarks, so you'll have them. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's easier than remembering what I have to say.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Pat.
Someone
Collecting for David.
I'll make sure he gets a copy.
Yeah.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Pat Campanero. I live at 264 East Deer Yard Road in Grand Marais, Minnesota. What else did you want?
That's fine.
That's fine? Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today. I did hand out what I'm speaking to, and I'm just going to read it to make sure I accomplish everything I wanted to say. I'm chair of the Public Health and Human Services Advisory Committee and sit on the Public Health and Human Services Board. And as you know, the Public Health and Human Services Board is sanctioned by the county to do these things: set policy, appropriate funds, approve expenditures, monitor agency progress toward outcomes, Late last Friday, I learned that the county board is considering adopting a discretionary funding policy, item 8 on today's agenda, that specifically concerns the Public Health and Human Services Department. This policy, suggested by the Budget and Facilities Advisory Committee, was not discussed with either the Public Health and Human Services Board nor the Public Health and Human Services Advisory Committee. Personally, I don't object to the intent of the policy, but rather question how this policy can potentially be applied to overall Public Health and Human Services Department functions. Specifically, I'm concerned about the timing and whether tying this to the approved levy will delay notification to applicants who have a fiduciary responsibility to their own organizations. We released the RFP in the summer months to allow for review, scoring, and recommendations early in everyone's budgeting process. With the final levy not being set until the end of the year, I would want to avoid any end-of-year notification of potential reductions to grantees so that they too know how their budgets are going to be set for the next year. Another concern of mine is that this policy may have the potential to impede other department recommendations. As an example, perhaps the ability to levy for ongoing wage subsidies for the local child care system that we talked about with our elected officials last week. Although I appreciate how thoughtful the commissioners and Budget Advisory Committee members were in approaching this policy, and I do believe that, I believe it missed one important step in the process, and that's discussion and input from the boards charged by the county to implement this policy. I'm requesting today that the board tables the policy and requests input from the Public Health and Human Services Board and the Public Health and Human Services Advisory Committee. Thank you for the work you do. I know it's hard, and I really appreciate all the efforts that you have and your attention to me today. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Are there other members of the public that wish to speak this morning? Any other members of the public who wish to speak? All right, if not, we'll move on to our consent agenda. Is there any item a commissioner wishes to pull this morning? If not, I'd recommend that someone make a motion to approve our consent agenda.
So move.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. Is there support?
I'll second it.
Thank you so much, Commissioner White. We have a motion and support for our consent agenda. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, we'll move on at this point to Public Health and Human Services, and we're going to talk a little bit about the commercial tobacco-free and smoke-free worksite and grounds policy at the community center. And I'd like to welcome Sarah Waddle this morning. Good morning. If you want to come up to the microphone. Thank you so much. So perhaps you want to introduce yourself for the public who is listening or watching
Sounds
this
good.
morning.
My name is Sarah Waddle, and I'm the Community Center Director and Extension Educator here in Cook County. And the policy that's being considered today is to extend the tobacco-free zone that currently encompasses the YMCA and the school grounds to also include all of the community center campus. We brought forth this idea a while ago. It's been in discussion and was recommended by the community center board to be considered for approval by the county board today. And we feel this would be a smart move for the county to promote healthy lifestyles for the youth in our community who are very present and active on our community center campus, and to just have a healthy outdoor facility, indoor facility, and work site for everybody at the community center.
All right. Are there any questions for Sarah this morning? Commissioner White.
Well, Sarah, would you explain what the campus entails, what different parts of the community center beyond the building?
Yeah, so the campus is everything. So the YMCA ends at the tennis courts, so it starts at the tennis courts, encompasses the playgrounds, the skate park, our parking lot. Both of our buildings obviously are already smoke-free indoors, but this would include the outdoor areas around them, the skating rinks, warming house, community garden, baseball field, Little League field, and the horse park.
In the log building?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Other questions or remarks? Commissioner Storley.
Thank you, Sarah, for bringing this forward. Only question I have is I'm not familiar with a substance called lobelia. What is that?
Can you
Nicotine,
point me to where that
lobelia,
is?
marijuana, or any other substance of natural or synthetic intention.
I guess
I
I'm
know-
not 100% sure either. I assume it's something people can smoke.
It must be. I know there's a flower named that, so maybe
Yeah.
they smoke the flower.
Yeah. A lot of the language in this policy was provided for us by the Public Health Law Center, which is a organization that can provide technical assistance to public health and government settings for writing policies like this to make sure that they are encompassing of all the things that we should be considering.
And I think right now with our future of looking into the marijuana situation, it's good to have this in here right now.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I'd certainly like to comment. I'm just very excited, thrilled that this has been brought forward, knowing what has been in the rest of the campus previously, and then knowing that area was kind of uncovered. It's really nice that we would have a consistency among that entire area where youth in our community are regularly gathering. So thank you so much for this.
Mhm.
Appreciate it. Other comments?
I'll just make a comment since I sit on the community center board. This was discussed at a couple different meetings and there was broad support. We kind of talked about some of the language in there and the implications, but there was broad support of the board to extend for the benefit of the youth, that we have lots of kids that are up there and we want to set a good example for the kids. And it makes sense since the YMCA and the school are already smoke-free that we extend that over to communities.
Commissioner White.
And that also includes you can't go to your car and sit in your car and smoke cigarettes. Because that was a get-around at the early stages when it was implemented at the school campus. So, like at football games and things. and
Right,
it's like,
not on the
no,
property.
Not on the property, so it's great. And there doesn't seem to be any issue with it anymore.
Right. Well, any other questions or comments for Sarah? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a
Make a
motion to
motion.
approve the tobacco-free policy at the community center.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Hawkins.
And I will absolutely second that.
Thank you, Commissioner White. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming and bringing this forward to us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right. We're going to jump down.
And I'm going to present the land services.
All right, you want to go ahead and do land
Yeah.
services? All right.
So Tim Nelson's not here today, so I agreed to present this item. The attendant shack at the Tofte transfer station is dilapidated and about to fall down. And so Tim is proposing, he got a price quote, a new attendant shed in the amount of roughly $3,600. This is money that was not in the ‑23 budget, but he does have funding in the landfill fund to pay for that. So that is the proposal today.
All right. Commissioner Storley, do you have any remarks you'd like to share with us?
Oh, do I ever. I've been working on this for a year. So basically, I'm just very, very happy, and Brody is too, because his shack is literally falling in. So, it just can't go on the way it is. So the only thing I will talk to Tim later on is that when the new one arrives, that everything electrical and so forth inside will be transferred. And he has some personal things in there too that he'll need to be there that day. But I'll talk to Tim about that.
I'm sure Tim will take care of that.
Yes, yes. So anyway, thank you, Tim. And we'll move forward to our new house.
All right, sounds good. Any other questions or remarks regarding the Tofte transfer station? If not, is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the acquisition of a new shack at the cost of $3,640 to replace the existing dilapidated shack at the Tofte transfer station.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. I'll second that. I've taken a look at it. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing that forward,
Sure.
Administrator Yorkie.
Of course.
All right. Let's see. At this point in time, we do have a legal matter that is pending.
We do, and I don't see anybody from the attorney's office present.
Correct.
So maybe what we could do is move on to item 8 and then circle back. And in the meantime, I'll see if I can get Molly.
All right, that sounds fine.
All right.
All right, so item 8 is our discretionary funding policy. As you'll recall, we've had an opportunity to be working on this for a number of months. We have approved an application and forms for the discretionary funding policy, and at this point, there was a recommendation from our Budget and Facilities Advisory Committee to bring it forward. So, are there any questions or remarks about the policy that is before you today, Commissioners?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
In light of what Pat brought forth this morning, both verbal and written, I would like to consider them to have a part in this decision too.
Other commissioners?
Well, as
Commissioner
the
Hawkins.
commissioner who sits on the Budget Advisory Committee, I had serious reservations about this. I see we do have a member here from that committee. It might be helpful to have him come up and give his perspective. I still have reservations. I agree with Pat. I'm concerned that this funding policy and how it is going to interact and play out, how do we coordinate with Public Health and Human Services? How are we going to make this work now? The idea that I got from our last meeting was, we should do this and we'll fix it later. We'll revise it. But maybe the commissioners would like to hear from the Budget advisory committee that supported it and get that perspective. I think that might be helpful if he's willing to come forward.
Is there anyone from the Budget and Facilities Advisory Committee that would like to speak this morning?
Not to put anybody on the spot.
I see Randy Knudsen coming forward.
Randy Knudsen, Budget Advisory Committee. Overall, I think it's a good policy. I think there's a couple of things that we're not sure how they're going to work out in terms of, working with PHHS. I think we can work through that this year, and if there's, I think they're going to be minor, honestly. My biggest concern on it is just, keeping track of the dollars, and that we kind of keep to that framework. And, I think we meet in a week to kind of go over what's going to happen. So I think by then, hopefully we'll know a little bit more about what PHHS is funding. In general, I support it, but, I'll be watching it, and I'm glad to be part of the group that's, going to be looking at spending the dollars. So I think we can kind of keep tabs on it that way. But any questions for me? I don't really have too much else to say.
Commissioner White.
Yeah.
Either of you, why wasn't Public Health and Human Services or the Advisory Council, why were they not asked for their input on this?
If I could, Commissioner, I'm not sure that Randy should be tasked with answering that question.
I can give it a stab.
I mean, I participate in that committee as well, and it was just something, part of it, I think, is because Public Health and Human Services, the process bifurcated at some point. So you have Public Health and Human Services doing that set of funding requests, with the Budget Advisory Committee doing everything else. There was back and forth. I know Commissioner Sullivan has been coordinating with that group and learning about their process. But, I think Pat Campanero's observation that they weren't actually consulted and that they probably should have been is a very good one. And I think there's probably a need to circle back with them to do that. I also just want to note, Pat made the observation that without some certainty about the likelihood of being funded by the county, organizations that apply for this kind of funding may not know until the end of the year what they're actually getting. I really appreciate that point. I think as much as possible, we should try to create certainty for applicants so they can kind of count on what is coming or not coming. But ultimately, it is the board's prerogative to set the final levy in December. And there may be a need to make changes from the preliminary levy that is set in September. So I think Pat's point is a really good one. I think we should strive to give those organizations some idea of what they're going to be getting. But ultimately, the levy is not final until December. So.
And I can just remark, I've had conversation with both Grace Grenager and with Allison McIntyre. They don't see that, it really is an issue for them. They have been presenting actually to the subcommittee that helped develop the policy in all of the forms. Grace worked with us very regularly. And I can't say why they didn't bring that forward to their own group, but I'm certainly fine with creating a pause. I would agree with Administrator Yorkie when Pat was speaking. The one thing is that none of these have ever in the past been guaranteed until that final levy is voted on, which is usually in December. So that is nothing different than it's been than before. But certainly if the policy is something that people feel more comfortable with going forward by presenting that to Public Health and Human Services and their advisory board, we can do that.
Absolutely. I mean, these are key, kind of a large department. They handle a lot of programming for our community, and to cut them out, which they didn't, but there's a communication problem if only the department heads know, and that wasn't given to the community volunteers that sit on these boards. I mean, that's disrespectful, and that's not the way to do business. I mean, we put it on pause, nothing will change. I appreciate that you guys are doing this. I think it's important, but I think I'm not expecting there'll be a change in what the policy is, but it needs to be talked about with the people in place there. We just pause it, and will that make a big difference? I mean,
It
to
would,
pause
we've
it?
not guaranteed notification to any groups by a particular date.
So, I mean, we just put it off until the next, put it on the agenda for our next meeting, and maybe in that time frame, the other other people will have had a chance to be asked and get their input, which probably, I mean, there's a good chance it won't be any different than what you've already gotten, but.
But it's an opportunity for
It's
conversation.
absolutely,
Madam Chair.
absolutely.
Randy had a
Chair Sullivan? Thank you. Just a little clarification, the way I looked at that process is, we were trying to, I guess, fill a hole that there wasn't a policy for, I guess, or at least the way we looked at it, for non-PHHS grant dollars. And so PHHS was reached out to, and that was based on our whole framework, was really how they had set their policy. I mean, that was.
Alignment with PHHS was the purpose of
Was
this
the purpose.
policy.
And so that feedback, I felt comfortable that communication had happened. So I don't feel like we forgot about them or didn't include them. I don't think we needed to sit down with them. I think we were trying to fill a hole, and we used what they had as a template to help us kind of fill the hole for non-PHHS spending out of the discretionary fund. And so me, this is really just kind of filling a hole and putting some framework around it. Policies are always looked at every year. I think it's a great fit. I think it's a great start. Policies are always, I think PHHS, as we've heard, has had revisions quite often.
Annually.
Annually, the way they look at it. And I suspect that we will as well. So I do think it's a good starting base. I think we can get rolling on it. I support it. I do want to keep track of the dollars that are spent. That's going to be what, I'm going to be looking at, because we don't want this to be a big spending deal. We wanted to just put some framework around it, and it's something that the Budget Advisory Policy has been kind of talking about for about 2 years. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you.
So I'm not criticizing the policy or anything like that, but I just think, really, I mean, if we're going to be, we have community volunteers who are putting in their time and energies and are very concerned and want to be part of helping our community, the courtesy of asking them. And we're not going to crumble and be bankrupt in a month if we don't pass this policy. And I understand and I appreciate that you're trying to get structure around the rest of it, but I just think we can't blow them off.
Well, and
I mean, it wasn't the point, but communications didn't follow through somewhere. I mean,
Madam Chair.
it just didn't happen, so.
I'd just like to note, I mean, the Public Health and Human Services Committee has made changes to its process without consulting the Budget Advisory Committee.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a matter of disrespect. It's just the processes have separated. And so, when you say it's disrespectful to members, I'm certain nobody in the Budget Advisory Committee intended any disrespect to anyone. But it's a matter of how those processes have evolved over time, and if there's a need to revisit how we do that and have a more coordinated process, which I think I'm getting some sense of that, then maybe that's what we need to talk about.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So this is the first one. We do it the right way, state that we understand that there will be policy changes for everybody as we go along, but this, because it's a new policy, I believe it's important to start out on the right step with the asking of everybody. There's nothing wrong with your intent and the energies you put into this and the reasoning behind it, or even the final project. I mean, it needs input. I mean, and they got input from the department heads, but I believe the advisory committees need to be, they need to be asked and part of the conversation. I know it takes more time, but we got time, right?
Well, I think that the Budget Advisory and Facilities Committee, the 5 citizens that sit on that group certainly understand process and the need for conversation and communication, and they would want that communication just as PHHS Advisory Council would. Commissioner Storley.
Thank you. Well, prior to 2018, the board handled everything here, and then we decided
Separate.
that that is too much to handle because of the depth of looking at the very thing that public health is now handling. However, we said this should be reviewed every few years to see if that is good and important, or should the board handle everything. Right now, I think we're probably at a point where, with the committee and the different groups, looking at it, individually, we're okay with it, but I think it's not cast in stone. We can always review it and see, is there some changes that need to be done? But right now, I think public health is doing a great job handling each of those categories. Maybe there's another category to add in the future, I don't know. So, for now, it's good. But I agree with Pat that we need to have a look-see again at it and not act today.
So it sounds like, is there a motion to table?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to table this until further review.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. Is there support?
I will support that.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Knudsen, for coming today. We appreciate it. All right, at this point in time, we're ready for item number 6, and we'll turn it over to Attorney Hicken.
Thank you. So the first item on the agenda under my heading would be a land sale or proposed land sale. This is an item that the board addressed a month ago when you approved an offer to Kylan Hill, who is here, and his wife Madeline Rauma. Roma? Rauma. Thank you. And Mr. Hill would like the board to consider a lower price. My understanding is that he made that offer presuming that the county was offering what it had been offering a couple years ago, a limited warranty deed. And that the county is in fact offering to sell this property using a quitclaim deed, which Mr. Hill is requesting a discount based on that. And I would ask, Chair, that we invite Mr. Hill to present his case for a lower price. When the board wants to consider that request and discuss it, my recommendation is that we go into a closed session pursuant to 13D05 subdivision 3, which allows the board to close a meeting to determine the asking price for real property to be sold by the government entity.
Thank you, Attorney Hicken. Mr. Hill, would you like to come forward to speak to the board, please? Good morning, and thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Good morning. My name is Kylan Hill, and my wife, Madeline Rauma, and I reside at 188 County Road 60. And the parcel in question is the county-owned parcel that is directly attached to the southern border of my property. County Attorney Hickey mentioned Chapter 13D. I do have a question regarding 13D. This is the June 24th edition of the paper on page A9 where the minutes were released. There was actually language that disclosed the price of the property in this public paper. Because we were still in negotiations and we had not had a signed purchase agreement yet, I'm curious as to why the sale price was disclosed in the newspaper.
Well, any action that the board takes, and the board took the action of authorizing this asking price, must be taken during an open meeting. So the board can go into closed session to discuss, to receive legal advice for other issues. but any action that they take must be taken in an open meeting. So when the board set the price, that was done during an open meeting.
So the offer that we proposed can go into a closed session. Once that's approved or denied in that closed session, then at that point, that information could be deemed public. Do I understand correctly?
Yes, it actually must,
Okay.
any action by the board with a vote must be taken in open meeting.
Okay, thank you. And as County Attorney Hicken had mentioned, when we initially made that offer, the second offer, I want to make clear, the second offer that we had made back in March, on March 27th of 2023, I was operating under the assumption that my offer, and if there was an acceptance, would come with that general warranty deed, which would include assurances from me, the buyer, that if there was any legal encumbrances on that piece of property, the seller, the county, would bear that risk. However, when I saw that it was quit claim title, you as the county are guaranteeing nothing on prior legal encumbrances on that piece of property, which in turn had me concerned with the risk that I was bearing. And so that full price offer of $34,800, I wanted to lower that because risk with a sale of a property necessarily includes a price tag with it. I do have a couple items that I'd like to discuss, first of which dates back to the initial offer that I made back in 2021 when my wife Madeline and I closed on the property on February the 21st. I was made aware by the sellers of the property that there was the 5-acre county property directly to the south of me. I sent an email, I believe it was to Mr. Powers, asking about that, and that kicked off this whole process of providing an offer. And if I recall correctly, the offer was allowed to be made from the 4 adjoining landowners from that property. I submitted an offer after discussion with Mr. Powers, and in our discussion, as I laid out in a letter I previously submitted to the board, I was advised that I need to, in my offer, specify that I would like to utilize funds from the County Revolving Loan Committee, or County Revolving Loan Fund. I later learned via letter that my offer was denied, and I was not provided any details at that time as to why that offer was denied. Steve Serba on the County Revolving Loan Committee called me, I believe it was early March of 2023, advising me that the county commissioners would like me to submit another offer for that property. I asked Mr. Serba at that time why my initial offer was denied, and he told me it was denied for 2 reasons. The first reason was the price was too low, which I'm not here to disagree with that. Second, he told me that my price was denied because being a representative of that committee, he told me with certainty that there was no chance that that committee was going to allow me to utilize those funds. The County Revolving Loan Fund was not going to let me utilize the funds, so they denied it from the start. Essentially what that means is my initial offer was null and void from the beginning, regardless of the price. And I'd like to ask a couple questions regarding the Revolving Loan Fund. I looked in your bylaws, and you are allowed to make and form committees to serve the purposes of the county. The Revolving Loan Fund is one of those. The guidelines that the Revolving Loan Committee has, and I'm going to quote from your website, the purpose of the County Revolving Loan Fund is to promote economic development within Cook County by providing loans to businesses located or to be located within the county, and to promote affordable housing for the employees of those businesses as necessary for continued economic development within the county. Furthermore, the guidelines of the Revolving Loan Fund is to provide loans for purchase and construction of leasehold improvements, loans for acquisition and renovation of machinery, essentially nothing to do with the proposed sale of this property. So my question for the board is, could I have an answer as to why this committee, which in their bylaws has nothing to do with the proposed sale of real estate, why were they tasked with providing a recommendation to the board as to yes or no, you should accept this offer? Furthermore, I believe that this, and it's not an accusation of purposeful error, but indeed I do believe that because the county revolving loan committee was tasked with reviewing this, maybe that's why there was an assumption that the county revolving loan fund would be utilized for this sale. Can I have is there anyone that's able to provide an answer to that?
Yeah, and some grave misunderstanding. I'd have to go back, that's a few years ago, but the only reason revolving loan fund was even mentioned, I brought that up to you because you indicated you were going to have trouble with cash on that payment because you just bought a piece of property. So that was brought up only because it gave you an option. There was never a requirement for revolving loan fund to be involved. It was your indication to me that you were going to have trouble coming up with cash. So we're looking for a way for you to provide a price that you could manage at that time. I'd have to go back and find emails and letters, et cetera, but I thought I made that very clear, but apparently I didn't. That was never a requirement.
A counterpoint on that, Mr. Powers, if that was an option for me, that necessarily entails that the county revolving loan committee would consider that, which, as Mr. Serbaugh stated.
He wasn't on the committee at that time. He doesn't, apparently we didn't have enough discussion on that. It was discussed at the committee.
Have the bylaws changed from that committee since
No.
that offer? So there arguably would not have been a change of course back then as to if that would have been considered an option for me. In other words, if the committee and if this bylaws from that committee have not changed from now and back when my initial offer was made, it was not an option for me to utilize. The bylaws do not allow for a private citizen like myself to access those funds at all. So, no, that still was not an option for me in the least. And we had extensive conversation on the phone, and you provided me with an example. For instance, a 20-year note at a 1% interest rate could have been an option for me.
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
may I suggest that we ask Mr. Hill to wrap up his comments and give us the reason why he wants a lower price for the land?
Certainly.
Okay.
Thank you, Attorney.
Thank you.
Mr. Hill.
The two issues that I had with this negotiation, one, as I had just got done explaining, was the utilization of the revolving loan fund committee and being involved in something that they should not have been involved with from the start. That's number one. Second, I was concerned with the quit claim deed, as I had mentioned before. And so I have, because my first offer was null and void, I proposed that we go back to that fiscal year where the proposed assessed value, fresh off an appraisal, was $29,800. I propose that I accept your 5% consideration for the quit claim, and my final offer will be $29,800 minus the 5%. Which would be $27,550. Now, in the email I got from Mr. Powers, you had offered a a 5% reduction for my risk on that quit claim title. That $27,550 is, I believe, fair. It's been a 2-year process. It addresses 2 concerns that I had from the buyer, the revolving loan committee, and the quick claim title. I will accept a quick claim title conveyance now, and it allows that piece of county property to go back into the tax rolls to receive tax income on it.
All right, just to clarify, so that's $27,500 plus an agreement for the quit claim deed.
Correct. I will agree to the quick claim deed at that price, yes.
Thank you.
$27,550 is what he said.
$27,550. All right, thank you so much. So given that information, I believe that we should consider going into closed session at this time. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to move our county board to go into a closed session pursuant of the Minnesota statute 13D.05 subdivision 3B.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Storley. Is there support?
Support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further discussion?
I do have one final comment that I would like to bring to the board's attention. In my email that I addressed with my offer, I just would like to remind that I had received confirmation from Cook County Soil and Water. The location of that property is directly to the south of me. The easement for that property runs along the eastern border of my property. If a driveway were to be placed in there, I would have to reroute my propane lines, and it would go within 5 feet of my well. I also want to remind the board that the Soil and Water District provided me a price of about $15,000 to $20,000 in wetland replacement credits if someone were to put a driveway into that piece of property. So not only if the board decides to have this property for the open market, whatever the price may be, the buyer would have to consider an extra at least $20,000 in wetland replacement, plus the cost of a driveway, plus power, plus other utilities for that. If you look on, and this is hearsay, but there are other 5-acre properties around the county that do have access that are anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000 that do not have the problems that I have brought forth with that 5-acre chunk of property. And those are all the comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are now in closed session. Back to our public and to those of you who are here in the county boardroom. We're returning from our closed session regarding the legal matter, a sale of property, parcel ID 53-102-2100. And the board has had an opportunity to discuss Mr. Hill's offer, and we are in a position where we would like to make a counter offer of $31,320, which would include a quitclaim deed. And is there a second to my motion?
I will second that.
Thank you, Commissioner White. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Attorney Hicken.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just describe a little bit of what we talked about in the room. $31,320 needs to be the county's floor for this piece of property. And that is because under statute, when any county is selling property pursuant to 37301 subdivision 1I, 90%, the county shall not sell that property for less than 90% of the current appraised value. So I believe that was a primary motivation.
Can I provide a comment on that?
Yes, you can, Mr. Hill.
On that parent I, if you also go to the bottom, it also states that this paragraph shall be liberally construed to encourage the sale of non-conforming real property and promote its return to the tax rolls. So does that also, could that also be interpreted on that 90%? Could also be liberally construed? Is that a set in stone?
If the board wants more legal advice, we would go back into a closed session.
Is there anyone that would wish to go back into closed session to discuss that matter? Seeing or hearing none,
Well, wait a minute. Yes, I think I need to know, there's got to be something, the question, 90%, so, or how do you, what's the get around or whatever? I mean, I would like to know, and if this requires the answer to be given in closed session, then I would feel that I had all the information.
so is there a motion to go into closed session?
What do you do with the current motion? Table
Oh,
it?
we would need to table. Thank you, appreciate that. Is there a motion to table?
I make a motion to table the current thing.
Is there a second?
I can't think.
I'll support.
All right, so we have a motion and support to table, and we will go into closed session. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
Motion.
All right, Commissioner
Second.
Surley. Second from Commissioner White. All in favor?
Just
Aye.
discussion, and is this based on the same statute section that we referred to before?
Correct.
13D05. Okay.
All right. Motion and second. All in favor? Aye. Session is closed.
Huddle on me.
Welcome back, everyone. We are returning from our closed session, and what we would like to communicate is we've made a motion and a second to sell the property for $31,320, and that would be with a quitclaim deed. We are going to stick with that. I would also, with that motion, like to designate authority to our county administrator and also myself as board chair to deal with any purchase agreements or any other paperwork related to this matter if this offer is accepted. So we have a motion and a second for $31,320 on property ID 53-102-2100. And again, with the paperwork being designated to the county administrator and the board chair. Any remarks you would like to share, Attorney Hicken?
Just looking for the agreement of the second on that amendment to the motion.
Correct. So I made the motion and a second to that amendment.
Who was the second?
Commissioner Storley. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So at this point, Mr. Hill, you can consider the counteroffer that we've made, and any communication can be through Attorney Hicken, and then we will work further on that. Thank
Okay.
you so much for coming today.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, the next item on our agenda is item 7. And Mr. Powers has a guest with us today to discuss our financial management plan.
Well, actually, we're the Humphrey Easement.
Oh,
is
thank
next
you.
under.
I apologize.
That's all right.
Ugh. All right, item C, which I forgot, the Humphrey Easement. So this is related to an agreement with George and Cheryl Humphrey, and a little, I believe, an oversight from the past, back in the 90s. And anything you would like to share, Attorney Hicken, with that?
I almost called you Your Honor. Madam Chair.
I don't have that much education.
Madam Chair, we have Attorney Rich Furlong here from Smith's Law, who represents the Humphreys. Mr. Furlong contacted our office, spoke to Brady and I specifically about this issue. What appears to have happened back in the 1990s is that the board intended to grant the Humphreys a driveway easement that would give them access through county land from the road to the building. The best illustration of what actually happened is attached to the board item, and we can put it up on the screen. First, I want to, if I can ask Jana to do the, I think it's called driveway aerial, to show the Humphreys driveway. And so this goes from, what's that road, Rich?
That's the Ball Club Road, and then, so you can see on the bottom right of the picture there is where the airport is. And then the road going north, mostly north-south, is the Ball Club Road. And then about in the middle left of the picture there, the big long gravel pit you can see is the Firewise pit there. That's off of the Ball Club Road. And then the road that winds up from that to the gravel pit you can see on the farthest middle right of the picture is George Humphrey's gravel pit.
Okay, so now that you've seen this, if I can ask Janet to display the depiction of the current easement. This is the easement that the county actually granted in the 1990s. Oh, can we flip it? Maybe not.
If
You
not,
have the
that's
same
okay.
problem I have.
It's the same road you just saw, that the road coming off of the Firewise pit. It's just turned north-south instead of running east-west. But the green depiction there, the small green square, is what I think it was the 94, I think was the original easement. The green square is what was actually granted by the easement. instead of where you can see the kind of red lines, that's where we need the easement, but the green lines was all that was given. And instead of giving them the coverage over the entire 160 acres for the road within that 160 acres, it only gave them a 10-acre square. And so what we need to do is expand it from just that green square to the area that you can see that's the red lines that are within the brown squares. Ignore anything. The green squares are Forest Service land, so we're handling that with the Forest Service. The brown squares are county land, and so where the red line crosses the brown squares is where we're asking for an easement from the county.
So if commissioners have any questions for me, I can try to answer those, or Mr. Furlong. This easement was only partially granted by the county, and it's my belief that the county intended to grant the entire driveway easement because the benefit from that little chunk is not very much because you can't get to the pit, actual gravel pit without going over county land without access. So I don't see any legal barriers to the county granting this at this point. I see it as a corrective action.
And I think I'll just get ahead of maybe one question that'll come up. There is already an existing Forest Service permit over those green lines that we saw, or maybe they were blue lines over those green squares. And so that's the only thing that we're dealing with the Forest Service is just a renewal of those. I mean, that already exists, so there's no question there. The real issue, like I said, is over the brown squares with the red lines. That's our issue here.
Any questions that commissioners have or remarks? To me, it just seems like a really unfortunate oversight. You know?
And he's been using it for, since then and before then. So I've driven the road myself. It's there.
Yeah, yeah. Commissioner Sterling.
Well, my point would be that for all these years, nobody's complained about anything. It's how did it come up?
I'm not sure I can answer that question,
Okay.
I suppose, without conferring with my client.
Somebody must have reviewed,
Yes, a review
Yes.
of the property and the access has taken place, and the
Yes.
oversight was noted.
Sure. Okay, back to 1995.
Yeah.
Takes a little while. Appreciate that you worked with them.
Any other questions or comments? If not, I'd entertain a motion. Commissioner White?
I'll make a motion to approve the revised driveway easement and maintenance agreement with George and Cheryl Humphrey.
Thank you so much. Is there support?
Support.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
All right. And now on to auditor powers regarding our
Madam
financial
Chair.
management plan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So County Administrator and I have been working with Bruce Kimmel of Ellers, asking him to update our financial management plan, as County Board has asked us to do several times. We first had a management plan a few years ago, but it hasn't been updated, so it's dramatically different from what we had several years ago, and it'll help us with looking at our CIP plan and our budgeting going forward, and I think I'll turn it over to Bruce there. He's provided a chart and...
And maybe while we're waiting to get, waiting to get started, I just add that this is foundational to the CIP, which you're going to be asked to take a look at again at the July 25th meeting. And we obviously need to have a strategy for financing the $13.4 million list of deferred maintenance that we have to catch up on, and also consider additional space. So this plan, this proposal that Bruce is going to present, creates that foundation for that conversation.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being so patient and waiting.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So, Madam Chair and Commissioners, I'm Bruce Kimmel with Ellers. It's nice to be with you face to face. Some new faces for me. here in person, but it's always a pleasure to come up to Grand Marais, especially on a nice day like this. And as I was joking with a couple of the commissioners, I'll actually be here through tomorrow with a short bop down to Two Harbors to meet with Lake County, but then back up here, so I'll be sure to be contributing local option sales tax to the economy while I'm here. If we could pull up the PowerPoint. What I wanted to do is just give you a few key bullet points, and I believe you have a paper copy of this as well as the handout. I know it's kind of small, but we can pull it up on the screen as well, and I really want this to be a conversation. You're looking at some major capital investments for the county. That I know goes without saying, but I want to acknowledge it, that this is a big deal. And so I want to make sure I'm answering your questions and any further inquiries that we could provide additional analysis on, so that you can move forward with confidence in financing the first, well, basically confirming your interest in moving forward with the CIP, but then also moving forward with the first phase of financing so that you can start knocking out some of these high priority projects for 2023 and 2024. And I do the up arrow, or if you'll advance it, Jana, great, thanks. Okay. And you know, maybe I'll just take 1 second to further introduce myself just a little bit, since I know some of you, but not others of you very well. I've been with Ellers now for just about 15 years, which is kind of hard to believe. And I was with Springstead for about 10 years before that. Springstead is a firm now called Baker Tilly. So I've been doing this work for about 25 years, and I've been advising the county along with my predecessor, Carolyn Drude, since you basically first started the local option sales tax, and then since then. So it's been a little while, but I do a lot of work with counties around the state on financial management planning, issuing bonds, economic development, affordable housing, all sorts of different financial issues, and then work on a similar portfolio of topics with cities around the state as well. And then I do some work in Kansas and Colorado. That's sort of a holdover from my previous firm, but I like getting out to those areas too, and work with a number of ski towns actually out in Colorado. Twist my arm, it's just terrible. Going out to places like Aspen and Winter Park in the wintertime. But you know, they have some similar challenges to Grand Marais, maybe a little bit more, with a little bit more of an exclamation point out there, but still the need for affordable housing, issues relating to workforce, infrastructure, and so on. So I definitely see some commonalities between some of the things you struggle with and are trying to improve here in Cook County, and some of what I deal with in Colorado as well. All right, so with that preamble, let's jump in. So what you have in front of you here in this beautiful 2-page document is a cash flow projection of the next 10 years, and this is at a high summary level for the county's operating revenues and expenditures, as well as your capital expenses as well, for 2023 through 2032. We've tried to project revenues and expenses for all county funds, so your big 3 funds, the general or revenue fund, the highway fund, public health and human services, all the way down to your smallest funds, which would be, at least currently, airport and the HRA fund. So wanting to really incorporate all of the funds that have a levy impact one way or the other. And we've also included some projected surplus revenues from the local option sales tax once that debt is paid off. We folded that into the general fund because that's where the legislature says you can use additional local option sales tax funds after the debt service is paid off there, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. We've also included the capital improvement plan. You've seen this document many, many times. I'm just seeing if I can find it in my messy folder here, but it's the big, page of projects, deferred maintenance, as well as 3 options for improvements here to the courthouse and to the law enforcement center, and different variations, as you know, on improving those facilities relating to inmates and the Justice Center or the Justice aspects of your operations. One of the things that we can do here with this model is we can adjust the costs that we're contemplating for the CIP as well as the funding mix. So we can look at different combinations of cash and debt. We can ramp the CIP costs either up or down, either by taking out specific projects or just by basically turning a dial to make things assume more expensive or less expensive. And if we're assuming less expensive, we're basically assuming that you won't be doing all the projects, but we're not necessarily specifying, well, let's yank out this rehab project or that renovation project. It's just more a way of scaling up or down the capital improvement plan investments. We also have your existing debt as well as debt service for potential capital improvement plan bonds folded in here as well. These are just estimates, so you'll see some really big bond numbers. That's not to say that you have to issue debt for this level. You could use more cash, but we know that having strong cash reserves is also a very strong priority for the county board. And so basically in order to make everything balance between keeping taxes reasonable and achieving your operating and capital priorities and having fund balances, that sort of sways the pendulum towards more debt because that helps to spread out that capital cost over a longer period of time than if you're using more cash, right? So it's a trade-off. Cash avoids debt, but it brings your fund balances down. Debt is a little more expensive, but it helps you preserve those fund balances. So over the coming weeks, months, and years, your job as the county board will really be to strike a balance that seems right here in 2023, but also going forward in 24, 25, and so on. And you'll have more bites at the apple. This isn't an all or nothing proposition now. What we're trying to do here is give you the data and the analysis that shows, yeah, there is a path forward. This is viable for the county. But by all means, we're not saying that this is a fixed plan. We expect it to evolve over time. And then again, we do assume the payoff of the 1% loss bonds. And believe it or not, we think that after 2 more years of collections here in 2023 and 2024, that sometime in 2025, we'll be able to pay off the remaining bonds in full, which is really quite tremendous. It speaks to the strength of your economy and the strength of the lost collections that we would be able to pay off those bonds potentially in 2025. Okay, let's go forward. So some of the key assumptions, and these are all, again, subject to revision and change. Brady, do you remember when Carolyn would pull out her crystal ball? She had a little miniature crystal ball. And she was quite a show woman, and I wish I had that crystal ball because mine is pretty murky, but we do feel like we've put together a pretty decently conservative set of assumptions. Conservative, i.e., less than rose-colored glasses, right? We're not overselling or being overly optimistic in terms of what we're projecting here for the county. But based on a conversation that James and Brady had with your county assessor, we are looking at the possibility or at least likelihood of a tax base increase somewhere around 12% for the coming fiscal year for pay 2024. It might be more towards 10%, it may be a little bit more than 12%, but we thought that 12% was a pretty good proxy, working proxy for how much the tax base could increase for pay 24. And then we're assuming an average of 6% per year thereafter. We feel like that's a pretty decent working estimate. Some years might be higher, some years might be lower, but on average, a 6% growth rate for the next 9 years after that. We're assuming that your non-levy operating revenues will grow 3 to 4% per year. We could see more aid, for instance, than that from the state on an average basis, and from the feds as well. But we didn't want to over-assume that you would have a bounty of non-levy revenues that would maybe unrealistically dampen the projected need for taxes. We want to make sure that you're getting the sense that if your operating costs are growing, that your levy is going to have to grow as well. And that, I think, is a pretty good basis to work from. We do assume that on average, your operating expenses will grow 4% per year. We wanted to show, a fairly robust level of inflation and required growth there. You will have opportunities to hold the line in some areas, while other areas will probably pop above 4%, right? So we're not saying that all line items will grow by 4%, but we wanted to show that as a working average across the government. And I think that's in line with your previous projections for operating expenses as well. I mentioned the defeasance of the remaining lost bonds from 2020. That was a refunding, if you'll recall, that saved the county quite a bit of money and reduced your debt service going forward for those lost bonds. So that in and of itself was a great step forward. You may not be familiar with the term defeasance. Defeasance is what you do when you're looking to pay off debt before the bonds are actually callable. So these bonds don't become callable until 2027, but you'll have enough money, we believe, by 2025 to basically set up a bank account, plunk all the money you'll need to pay off the bonds in 2027, but do it 2 years early, earn interest, and then that defeasance account basically runs on autopilot for 2 years until the bonds are paid off. So in effect, even though the bonds are still outstanding, if you defease a debt issue, like we're projecting in 2025, it's off your books because the trustee at US Bank or Wells Fargo or wherever has verified that there's enough money in there along with interest earnings to pay off the bonds in full 2 years later, and it's not a concern of the county any longer. So that's what we would be looking to do as a goal, and avoid that additional interest expense for the county. And then finally, this is the big kahuna here under assumptions, is if you add up everything in that CIP, all the deferred maintenance over the next 5 to 6 years, as well as option A for the Justice Center improvements, that total is about $25 million. And then what we've done is we've included all of that expenditure as well as another $450,000 per year in the last 4 years of the projection, 2029 through 2032. So in total, it's about $27 million of investment over the next 10 years in your facilities. We wanted this base case to test the proposition. If you keep on agreeing that all of these projects are a priority for the county, can you find a way to afford doing this? And if we can go to the next slide. Way to make it dramatic. Our conclusion is that if you go down actually to the third bullet, you really do have the fiscal capacity to do this. It's not to say that you won't have decisions along the way, but given the strength of the county's finances, given your fund balances, given some of the additional lost revenues that are going to be available, and given your ability to increase property taxes at a reasonable rate, not with any spikes, we do feel like all of these items coalesce to a conclusion that, yes, you do have the financial capacity to move forward with this CIP. In addition, we are estimating that in order to keep basically things in balance with your operating and capital costs and your fund balances, that you can do that with an average levy increase of about 5 to 6% per year. I have 6% up there, but all things being equal and given the assumptions that we used, we feel like that is an achievable target. And as I noted before, this is only the start of many conversations to come. And from our perspective, we see kind of 3 legs to the stool, right? We have your tax levies. Obviously, you report to the residents, you report to the taxpayers, and I know that for your own, in your own interests, as the county, you want to make sure that those tax levies and impacts stay reasonable for people. We also know that you want to make sure that the county has the resources it needs to operate efficiently, and that you don't need to make any major cuts either to operating or capital programs. And again, that you keep reasonable cash reserves. So all three of those legs of the stool in terms of fiscal health will need ongoing discussion. But based on the analysis we've done here in working with James and Brady, we do believe that you have the fiscal wherewithal to move forward with the capital plan, and that knowing that your tax levies can stay in a reasonable range and keep everything going pretty much forward as they have in recent years. So why don't I stop there, ask what questions you have, and we can dig into numbers too if you'd like.
Commissioner White.
Could you go over defeasance one more time, please? My understanding is that we have the funds and the full amount to pay it off 2 years early.
Right.
But then we tell the lender, we've got the money, but we're not giving it to you? Is that-
Right, in part
And we
because you-
continue to tax and bring in those revenues and put it into a savings account for us?
Right.
Or what, is that it? And the lender approves that?
The lender really doesn't have a say in it. You can do it of your own sole discretion. And it's basically just giving them a heads up that as of the first possible date on which you can actually prepay the bonds is in 2027, excuse me. But you will have enough cash built up in the loss fund to prepay in 2025. Well, what to do there? The bond documents say you can't prepay until 2027, but you have the money in 2025. That's where a defeasance comes into play, where you deposit the money, you factor in exactly what you'll be earning in fixed investments. So you would probably buy treasuries or another investment that you know exactly how much you would get paid. And then we can basically telegraph to the bond market that these bonds are defeased. The bondholders won't get paid off until 2027, but from your perspective, you're done and they're no longer an obligation of the county.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, it's kind of an arcane thing, but I wanted to make sure everyone here knew that they would be paid off, but not actually paid off until 2027. Yeah.
The questions, Commissioner Hawkins.
Yeah, thanks. There's a couple. First of all, and this might be for James and Brady, but I noticed the HRA fund is assuming no increases, basically. And I'm just going to tell you, that's not going to be happening. The request coming in, I'm kind of surprised it's been discussed. I thought you guys would have that information. So that line has to be adjusted. But I have a question about going back to the assumptions. What's the rationale that some funds have a 3% increase in revenues and others have 4%? Why don't we just do the same assumption across all funds?
In the non-levy revenues?
Right.
Right. That's a great question. Basically, it was our call at Ellers that the highway fund, for instance, had more resources available to it in terms of grants and the likelihood of increased highway aids and so on to justify an average of 4% growth in non-levy revenues, whereas the general fund maybe would have less opportunity or less certainty in terms of its growth of non-levy revenues, and that a lower rate was appropriate there.
Okay.
We could hold it at 3% across the board just to be more conservative. That would absolutely be prudent and reasonable to do. All that would show is just a little bit more pressure on the tax levy, which, you know, may be a reasonable assumption. And you know, increasing HRA funding, of course, is absolutely appropriate as an assumption as well. We know how important that is to the county. That also will just increase by a small amount. It is actually by a small amount, the levy impact, given that the HRA is a pretty small part of the county's operations, and even with growth, it's still going to be a relatively small part.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. I just wanted to
Sure, great question.
understand your rationale
Yeah.
for that. And another one, that I was, sorry, trying to read this now. So, for the general fund, in years 2030 to 2032, we have an annual deficit of $1 to $2 million. What happens after that? What happens in 2033? For the general fund where it says annual surplus or deficit, and if you go out 2030, it's showing a deficit for 2030. Can you explain to me how that comes about?
Sure. Where that comes about is the end of the surplus local option sales taxes. So
That's when that kicks in, okay.
excuse me.
That's when it ends, okay,
Yeah.
2030,
So
that's,
if you see row 13, and I know those row numbers are small, but the third line down, essentially in the general fund projection, you can see that given our assumption of amassing enough money through 2024 to retire those lost bonds, you can see that we're projecting additional lost revenues that's available for all sorts of corporate purposes of the county through the first quarter of 2030. That is the 20-year maximum clock for the lost revenues, and so that's why the number in 2030 is about a quarter of the number of the previous year. And then after March, essentially, of 2030, those lost revenues under the current authorization would no longer be collected. Now, I should note that you will have the ability in future years to go to the voters with a new lost question. So I'm not assuming that you won't do that, or there won't be future projects that could be paid with lost revenues. But we're assuming of the current 1% lost that it would sunset in the winter of 2030.
thank you for clarifying that for me.
Yeah. And then just for full transparency, you're right that the ending of that does create an annual deficit, and it's absolutely appropriate to ask what happens after 2032. I don't want it to seem like it's a map of the world from the Middle Ages where there's dragons off to the edge of the map. But that's where this model only goes so far, right? Because we know that the world for the county will be different again 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 7 years from now. So we'll want to keep working this model. I hope to keep working this model with you over the next 10 years so that we keep adjusting assumptions and making sure that we're not going to fall off a cliff, that we're planning appropriately for operating costs, capital costs, tax levy management, and fund balances. So I guess make my three-legged stool a four-legged stool. It's more stable anyways. Operating capital, taxes, and fund balances. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions by commissioners? Any reaction or comments, Auditor Powers or Administrator Yorkie you'd like to make?
Well, I'm really grateful to Bruce for his counsel on this plan. There are a lot of moving parts, obviously, and I feel really good about our having taken a pretty conservative approach to making these projections. And like Bruce said, it's something that as we move forward, we're going to have to make additional adjustments to reflect what's actually happening. But I feel really comfortable about our position in being able to actually get the CIP implemented. That's vitally important. I mean, you all have seen the condition that our buildings are in. We do have some really critical projects that need to be addressed in the short term. And so getting this plan approved and starting to take action to secure contractors to do projects is going to be really important. So appreciate your work, Bruce.
Thank you.
Commissioner White?
But when this was created with the CIP plan, in here, there's an assumption that there's going to be new building going on. And we, as a board, have not really had a discussion. We don't really even have, I mean, the numbers that were given to us by the consultants for the repair of the buildings was pretty complete, but when you're talking new construction, we have nice colored pictures.
But we needed to present.
And so I would like to know, I mean, so they came up with numbers somewhere, but how, I mean, somewhere in their notes, they know why they came up with a certain number. And maybe, I mean, that's the number we used. I mean, it's all assumed we're going ahead, we're building new things. And I just think that we have not had enough thought and discussion about that part of it. But this plan includes it just in the event that it does happen. So then we have it figured out. It's not like.
You know, one thing I would just like to raise is that there's a lot in here, I found my handout, of projects that isn't new construction as well, right? And I guess I'm not fully aware of, you know, some of the distinctions, but from discussions with County Administrator Jerky and Auditor Powers, it's clear that you have some projects that really need to get going here in 2023 and the first part of 2024 in order to avoid an escalation of costs, making things worse, right? And so I think you could, from my perspective at least, you could confidently move forward with a financing plan for at least some degree of the CIP, even knowing that as it relates to courthouse and LEC improvements, you have more discussions to go on that front. Would that be a fair characterization?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to add to that, I understood the instruction from the board to be complete the FMP, the financial management plan, so that we have a roadmap for implementing the CIP, the capital improvement plan. As Bruce said, I mean, we can make adjustments. If there are projects that fall out of the CIP for whatever reason, we can make those adjustments. So this is just providing a roadmap for how we can get to the finish line with the CIP, including the addition of new space. And if there's a need, I agree, there's a need for more discussion. The other thing to mention is we've applied for state bonding, which is not contemplated in this plan. And that was part of the conservative assumption that we made. The numbers would change significantly if we were to access state support for our CIP. So a lot of moving parts. This is just the initial take on what we could do. And again, having made conservative assumptions, I feel really good about our position. If we get that additional assistance, we're going to be in an even better position.
Commissioner Hawkins, thank you. And I was one that said, we need to see this, so I do appreciate it. We have it. This is valuable information. I'm wondering now when, and I get, it's a crystal ball. I understand that's what this is. But I'm wondering who at the county level here is going to be updating this plan when we do decide to make some changes. Who's responsible for updating this plan and giving us a new chart?
I would expect Brady and I in consultation with others.
I just want to clear that up on one hand, because, yeah, this is something that needs to, it's good for now, but once we start making more decisions and this has to be updated
For
again.
sure,
So
for sure.
we have accurate, timely information.
Absolutely. Commissioner Stoyler?
Well, thank you, Bruce. This is really very, very helpful, and to James and Brady. When we had the consultants come in and review all of our buildings, they rated everything down to replace a light switch right now, or put a door off. So we have all that. Excuse me. So I think we have a good basis. Were you able to see that?
I did not review all of that in detail. I think we took a look at some of it, but.
Well, Bruce does have the full list of all
Yeah.
the CIP costs
Right.
across the 5-6 years of the plan.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what's really helpful to us, to
Good.
see each department. They came in and did such a thorough look at everything, walls, ceilings, floors, you name it. So that's a good guideline for us.
Good. Good.
Other questions or comments by commissioners?
We would review this probably annually, update it?
At least.
At
At
least.
least.
Yeah. Probably twice a year would be better.
And I like the
Commissioners,
fact.
I would just second that and say certainly this time each year would be good in advance of or as you're getting going with your budgeting process for the next year. And then, yeah, a check base probably every winter would be good as well. Yeah.
That was just going to be my remark. If we looked at it prior to setting the preliminary levy, and then we look at it again in the winter, that would be ideal. But I really appreciate the conservative approach that you've taken, all your assumptions. And as I was thinking about this, I thought about the analogy of people looking at mortgages a few years ago and refinancing when interest rates changed, and thinking about the long haul and how you take your costs and think about them over decades. And I really am so excited that we have something like this for our county. I really like it.
The county's done this in the past, right? Had losers, I mean, on a regular basis, no?
Once, when we were
Back in, was it 2017, maybe?
about
2018?
17 to 18.
Yeah.
Okay.
So not during the time that the majority of the board was here, so.
Right. We did it before the county issued capital improvement bonds for a host of projects back in, I think it was 2018, to evaluate your financial capacity to take on those projects.
Commissioner Hawkins?
I have one more question about your assumptions here about 4 different bond proceeds.
Yeah.
And can you explain how you came up with those years, those amounts?
Now you're talking my language. Yes, I can. So if the Justice Center project, option A, is kind of the, 600-pound gorilla. Do gorillas weigh 600 pounds? I've never known that.
Maybe more.
But depending on whether and when you tackle a project of that magnitude will decide the size of that big bond issue, basically. You may recall from previous bonding discussions that there is an additional benefit to the county if you issue less than $10 million of tax-exempt debt in a given calendar year. It's called bank qualification, and it gets you basically a better interest rate than you would if you were issuing more than $10 million in a year. So what I was trying to do with the first 2 years, and assuming that you would undertake something like the Justice Center improvements or one of the lesser options in 2024, is looking at 23 and 24 in tandem essentially, and seeing what amount of bonding would make sense in 23 to allow you to then do a $10 million issue in 2024. And the $9.8 million of proceeds you see, excuse me, on row 73 is reflective of a $10 million issue in 2024. So And then 25, 26, and 27 are more flexible, because I know you'll be changing your CIP as you go forward. Some projects will probably get deferred, some projects may cost more, some may get moved up, that's all going to be in flux. So those bond issues and timing could be changed as well. And it's important to know that, you might very well do a number of these smaller projects on a cash basis with no bonding involved, and that you absolutely have the capacity to do as well. But the first 2 years, I guess, are most important, and that's based on an assumption that you're going to undertake a major project in 2024. And so if that didn't happen, then you wouldn't have that big bond issue in 2024.
I'd like to know your reasoning. I know you have a good reason, but.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So I appreciate
Yeah,
you giving me a reason.
You always wonder, like, should I footnote all of it? And
No, it's just me.
No, I appreciate it, though. And so that is something that I would like to raise with the board is, and with James and with Brady, knowing, these projects in 2023 and 2024 far better than I do. Would it make sense for us to start working on a financing plan to bond for $4 million or $5 million or something in that vicinity here, still in 2023, knock that out, you have proceeds that are somewhat flexible and can be used for a number of projects that get you through this year and probably actually through a good chunk of 2024 as well, and could even pay for some of your preliminary costs relating to, I'll just keep calling it the Justice Center, it's easier than calling it second floor addition. But I'd like, if you're comfortable doing this, I'd like to encourage some discussion and some direction, informal direction on that point, so that I can work with James and Brady on coming back to you, whether it's in a month or two or whatever makes sense, with a financing plan.
What are interest rates going, what is
Interest
it
rates
right
are
now?
better than you would think, actually. Right now, you would look at if you sold bonds for 20 years, your interest rate would be about 3.7% in today's market, fixed for 20 years. A 15-year deal would be closer to 3.5%. We just sold bonds yesterday for an entity, 10-year bonds that were at 3.25%. And so, yes, they've come up, and they're not where they were when the county has been issuing debt in the last 5 years, but still, they're a lot flatter and a lot more stable than you might think with all the hubbub around what the Fed is or isn't doing. And a big reason for that is there's still a lot of investors that really want municipal bonds, and so they're going to buy muni bonds that are available no matter what else is going on, and so they're willing to take lower rates than you might otherwise think. There's not enough supply from issuers like the county to meet the demand, and so as a result, on yesterday's bond issue that we had for the city of Albert Lea, I think we had 9 bidders on that deal, just falling over themselves to buy these bonds, and they do expect a certain level of interest rate, but if there weren't that kind of demand, we would expect our clients to have to pay more, right, in order to get those bonds sold.
Bruce, I'm going to ask you to look into that crystal ball that you didn't bring. What's your sense of how rates might change over, say, the coming 6 months?
I expect them to stay pretty stable. And actually, I could see them improving a little bit as well. There's still some really mixed messages about whether we are in a recession or going into a recession. And as a result of that, usually with bonds, the yield curve is like this, where the further, this is year 0, this is year 10 or 20 or 15 or 20, and rates go up along that yield curve. Right now, the yield curve is actually slightly inverted for the first several years and then goes up because people are basically demanding higher interest rate right now due to inflation, but then they expect inflation to end and actually for us to go into a recession and then back up. I'd like to see that yield curve normalize a little bit, and I expect actually for that to happen. So it's not a huge deal, but yeah, I'll stop there before I get further into the wonky weeds. But I actually could see interest rates improving a little bit over the next six months.
Mhm.
One other thing to note, this is kind of crazy, but Brady, I was thinking about this also as it relates to the loss bonds. You can buy one-year treasuries now for about 5%. And so, and those are taxable, but you don't pay, you don't pay income tax as a county. So right now you have an ability to arbitrage, and people think that's a dirty word, but it's really not. You would have the ability to issue these bonds and actually make a little bit of money on the bond proceeds. The federal government only allows you to keep a certain amount of arbitrage, meaning earnings on the bond proceeds, but you can earn a little bit, and certainly you wouldn't be losing money. So you could issue the bonds, bank those proceeds, use some of them this year, use some of them next year, and you would invest accordingly so that you're basically earning as much in interest as you're paying out in interest to the bondholders, which is a really nice position to be in. We haven't been in that kind of arbitrage, or at least neutral situation for many, many years. And so that would be an opportunity to be very efficient with this.
Thank you so much. Other questions or remarks? Well, I think we really appreciate all the work you've done and
you.
the collaboration with our staff. And I'm wondering if there is a motion to accept the FMP, our financial management plan.
I'll make a motion to accept the financial management plan.
Thank you, Commissioner White. Is there support?
I'll support.
Thank you. We have a motion and support. Any further discussion?
Well,
Commissioner Hawkins.
I'm just curious, I thought this was just information for us, so accepting it it makes me wonder what that means, because this is not final. So
I would
I'm just
say-
wondering the sense of why
Yeah.
why it's a motion.
Well, I mean, that's for you all to determine.
Okay.
It is not final insofar as we will always be making adjustments to it. And so in that way, you're never going to have a final plan. It's
Right.
always subject to change. But I guess approving this in concept and agreeing that the assumptions that we've included here in terms of, income projections, cost projections, is our kind of starting assumption.
I'm just hearing in the discussion that we all appreciate and support and agree with the direction that this is taken and the information we've provided. So my thought was that we would accept the plan as turned in. It certainly, we're looking at a couple of times a year working with this and revising it and updating it, yes.
The other thing that I would say too is that the approval of the CIP is a separate issue, right? And to the extent that part of your concern is about what is actually included in the CIP, we wanted to have this plan kind of in place and approved in concept so that we could move on to the CIP approval discussion. And so that would be a reason for saying, yes, we agree to this in concept, with the understanding that adjustments can and will be made as we work through the process of agreeing on the CIP.
Right, so I voted as I made the motion, in that this ties us to nothing. It just gives you a roadmap saying, well, we can't really afford this, or, and then about the bond, it's interesting. I understood what you were saying, but I couldn't tell anybody what you said. But I got it at the moment, and so it made sense. And so that was, and yes, as far as the capital improvement plan, I believe we have many hours of discussion yet, and if this is not tying us to
Anything.
anything, not to a new gravel road, not to any, so.
Correct. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure, and you have a great team that I've enjoyed working with. So if I could just ask one follow-up question, though, and maybe this is subject to further discussions about the CIP. Do you just, and this isn't binding either, but do you anticipate a bond issue sometime this fall to move on these projects? Because then I could at least start putting the wheels in motion. Or do you think it's really likely to be pushed into 2024 at the earliest? And there's no wrong answers. This isn't a trick question.
Ooh.
Me too. Administrator.
We know that we have projects that we need to get underway that are of critical importance. So I think the answer, in my view, would be yes, but I don't make that
Deferred
decision.
maintenance,
But that's
yes.
kind of my question of what am I making a motion for? Because that plan says $5 million in 2023, so
And
just
maybe I would
curious
just call
where
it
we're at.
maybe I would even call it a forecast more than a plan.
Okay.
Because the $5 million was all of, me going like that in terms of reconciling. I want to say that this projection was a lot more than me going like this, but the $5 million was kind of a swag based on what I'm seeing in here and knowing what you might be biting off for 23 and 24. I would not be surprised if you came back to me and said, gee, we're comfortable doing something less than that this year just to get the wheels moving and getting the most critical projects done. So
I think we need
I want to
Yeah.
emphasize that I'm not saying it really should be 5 million, but I needed a placeholder to convey, the magnitude of what you could be taking on.
Absolutely.
Could we earn that interest, the arbitrage interest for like up to a couple of years?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not that long,
Okay.
without having to restrict the yield.
And it made me think also, just for what it's worth, that we should chat about how the lost revenues are invested as well, just given the really unusual circumstances right now.
And any financial commitments that we make, of course, are subject to board discussion and approval. So.
All right, well, thank
thank
you
you very
so
much.
much. We
Yeah.
appreciate you coming and speaking with us today.
I just
Commissioner
have one
White.
question. When we do a review with you, in the coming years, in 6 months, or do you come here to explain?
I can. Yeah.
Can we
absolutely.
afford to have him come and explain? Because I do understand when it is explained by someone who eyes light up when you say the word bond. But it's very helpful for me to hear it from the source who can describe it in multiple ways until I get it.
Totally agree. And I mean, this is why we need somebody with Bruce's expertise advising us on these matters, because, I mean, I kind of get excited about the idea of bonds, but I can't explain them the way he does, so.
Yeah, I'm confessed bond geek. But actually, I prefer doing this financial planning even more than working on bonds, because this is where the magic happens, right? Like, in terms of making sure that you feel confident that you've got a roadmap that is workable and won't have you driving into the lake. So,
Probably slide into.
yeah. So I would welcome Commissioner White coming back. I know you have great AV capabilities, and I can zoom in whenever. But I would be happy to come up as often as you would like to have me. So.
That's not my call, that would be. I don't know how often we need you, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we all felt that it was important for me to be here for today's conversation.
Very much so.
This is a lot of money, and you have a lot of needs, but you also have a really solid financial standing to work from. So,
All right. Well, thank you so much.
thank you.
We appreciate it. All right. Well, we have it have taken care of items 7 and 8 already, so we're on to our county administrator.
Excellent. So a couple of things. As Bruce alluded to, Brady and I have been working to pull together the budget proposal for fiscal year '24. Not surprisingly, we knew that the salary increases that were approved as part of the pay study last year were going to have an impact on the levy for next year. We are working to kind of tweak those numbers. There are some variables in terms of both proposed new spending that we're trying to nail down. We have a couple of positions. I think we mentioned the county attorney's office is seeking a new assistant attorney position to address the significant workload that they've been dealing with and expect to continue to have in the future. There was also a position that was being proposed by the sheriff's office that we just got an email from the sheriff yesterday that there may be actually money in the budget already to cover that. So we're in the process of making adjustments. So I don't have a number for you, but I will at the next meeting. We'll present the proposed general fund budget. I should also mention I've spoken with Allison McIntyre regarding the Public Health and Human Services budget proposal for next year. They had expected, the calendar showed them presenting that at next week's meeting. And with the departure of Lori Erickson and the hiring of a new fiscal manager, and then also we're awaiting reimbursement rates from the state. And so we are going to push that presentation into August. So that we have better numbers and so that they have a little more time to kind of get that done, because Lori has big shoes to fill. And so that's kind of where that is. But I expect at the next meeting, we'll have some preliminary numbers to present to you, and are working to, as always, keep the levy proposal as low as we possibly can. So Brady, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
No, I think we're close. We're just refining some of the numbers, making sure that.
Yeah. And then I guess the other big thing to add is that now with the approval of the financial management plan, I'm going to be circling back with CRBPS, our consultant on the capital improvement plan, to talk about next steps there. We are going to need some help in kind of getting projects in the queue. We're going to need some construction management oversight to get that thing rolling. And so I'll be talking with them about the next steps as we concurrently work with Bruce to figure out what that bond issuance is going to look like. So it's good to see these big projects kind of moving forward. It's a lot to contemplate, but again, I feel like we're in a really good position. I should mention that while we've been sitting here this morning, I did get emails from Minnesota Management and Budget confirming the receipt of our bonding applications and also requesting some additional information. So we'll be following up on that. I don't know if we've discussed it in the meeting, in the last business meeting, but in talking with folks who've been through the bonding process before, we have been counseled that you're not always successful the first time out when you're making a request. So I don't want to be too optimistic about our prospects, but I also feel like we have a really solid proposal. I think doing something that's focused on public safety and justice is something that will resonate well in St. Paul. So trying to keep our hopes up about that, and we should know more as things move forward. I did have a chance last week when Senator Hochschild and Representative Scraba were in town. I had a chance to talk with them about our bonding proposals and just shared that information with them. So we'll keep working through that channel and trying to make sure that we do everything we can to increase our prospects for an award. So that's what I've got.
Thank you so much. All right, on to commissioner reports. Commissioner Hawkins.
I guess I don't have anything to report right now.
Commissioner Storley.
Well, last week we had our Cook County invasive species get together, and once a critter or anything has a title, it's hard to switch. So we're all used to the title gypsy moth. Now it's called the spongy moth. And that was changed by etymologists, not by a political group, which I thought was interesting. Anyway, we're just seeing our trees, especially a certain couple of types of white pine, and that being defoliated because of this. It happens every so often. But I didn't realize they also go after other trees and bushes, and when they get tired of chewing on a needle, then they'll go to other sources for their defoliation. So that was pretty interesting. And we'd also found out that there's some brochures at the parks now that talk about our floral invasive species that are coming along, especially along the highway, which I was kind of surprised at. The Russian olive and the queen of the meadow, which when we look at them, we think, oh, that's really pretty and it's great and they're filling the ditches, but they're also invasive too. So it was a good meeting.
All right. Commissioner White?
I have a lot to say. Okay. The Healthy Housing Group, they're wrapping up a grant that they had funding for doing assessments for 20 different households, checking their, what they need to fix them up. I mean, as far as how airtight are they, there's water intrusion, what are your mold issues, and then they didn't have enough funding to actually hire for all the repairs, the window replacements and everything, but they were able to help mitigate some of the issues to improve the living in these spaces. They handed out a lot of smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, they had fire extinguishers, and they did a lot for 20 different households. And it was just, and having the occupants be there, be on site, and actually be part of the process. I just thought that was a really, really nice thing. So anyway, there's that. Then we're down to the the Council on Aging down at the hubs. And we got, I just want to explain a little more. You see these advertisements on TV like, help, I've fallen down and I can't get up, so you push a little button. Well, that is what our, down at the hub, that is what the board does down there. They are the source for those devices, and they monitor them through the agency in Duluth, or whomever is in charge of this whole program. But they, when batteries get low on the devices, they are contacted, and then they go out, and they, meaning volunteers from the hub, go and they replace the batteries. And most of the users, there are about 20 people. Is that true? No, I don't know. We had a lot of 20 people. There are about 20 people that make use of these in the county. Many from the Grand Portage, the eastern end of the county, and then down in Lutsen, Tofte also. In Grand Portage, their health clinic helps replace batteries up there, and then otherwise they are board members that do the replacement of batteries in the rest of the county off the reservation. So it's a $30 a month fee for people to have one of these. I do not know if social services or if anybody has a way to help people defer that maintenance cost, but it certainly would be a good thing for many of our residents who live alone or live way back in the woods or wherever they live. So that was one thing. The hub down there also provided meals for the youth of the county because the school couldn't this year. And they only had actually about nine meals that were served. It was a different format. You couldn't just drop in, and in reality, most of the kids that need to be fed during the summer months are either in the child care program or programming that's already happening up at the schools. So that was good to know too. Also and I want to promote anytime the hub, the senior center, is having a fundraiser, please go for it, because they, as part of their operating yearly budgets, they need to raise at least $12,000. They run on a shoestring budget. Hundreds of hours of volunteer time to keep the place functioning and offering opportunities for the community. And so they need to raise $12,000 a year to make ends meet. So go have their pancakes, go to whatever sales they're going to be having, and support them. The end. I'm done.
All right.
There
Thank
was
you very
something else,
much.
but I don't remember. I can't find my notes, so.
All right. Well, tying in with what Commissioner Storley mentioned about invasive species and such, we had quite a lengthy Firewise meeting, and although spruce budworm is not invasive, it's certainly problematic in Cook County. We are all seeing it, and so we talked at length about some of the grants that are available up the Gunflint Trail, some of the thinning that's being done, about when you can spray, which is early May, but talked a lot about that at the Firewise meeting. And then also that's been a big part of the conversation at the local Lake Association meetings. Although we talk about certainly get the lead out and aquatic invasive species, we're talking a lot about spruce budworm. And so a lot of associations and neighborhoods, if you will, are kind of organizing and talking about how they're going to take trees out, who they want to contact for tree removal, and then what to replant. Thinking not only about, well, red pine and white pine and jack pine being kind of obvious replacements, but thinking about maples and oaks, so that we're thinking about how our trees are going to grow as the climate changes. So it was really interesting to hear those different species of trees, in particular oak, being talked about as replacements here in Cook County. But that is the state of affairs that we're in. I had an opportunity to go to the Gunflint Trail Scenic Byway meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we had the big sign reveal at Swamper Lake. I'm sure Commissioner Hawkins has driven by there on her way up the trail. But it's really nice to see that sign back up after a couple of years. Great collaboration between the Forest Service and the DNR and the Grand Portage Band, and just everybody to make sure it's accurate, it's portraying history. And then there's a lot of current information. There's 3 slots where flyers can be put in the case of fire evacuation, emergency information for people both who are visiting the trail and live on the trail. So I was very, very impressed with that. As Administrator Yorkie mentioned, we had a child care meeting at the Cook County Higher Ed building last week. Commissioner Hawkins was there as well, and it was really great to hear about the progress that was made at the legislature this year with childcare, but about the continuing work that we need to do. Clearly, housing and childcare, again, being things that we have to keep front and center. And lastly, I started my ride-alongs with law enforcement. I scheduled 3 of them. Elected officials can do that, and as I was selecting who I was going to ride along with and when, I thought about making sure I touched male and female deputies, that I looked at different days of the week, different times of the day. I did a couple of ride-alongs the week of the 4th of July, when we have tons of tourists here, to see how that really impacts and changes what happens in the duties and the situations that are being responded to. I've had a chance not only to see on the inside, and I have a final ride-along coming up, see on the inside their duties, but to hear their concerns, to talk about their facility. I've also spoken with dispatchers, our sheriff, our deputy sheriff, and it's just been really, really valuable. And when I finish that final ride-along here, I would like to take some time to talk to the board about what I've learned in terms of their needs, not only with training, but with facility. I think it will help to inform us with our CIP as we move forward. I talked to them about what happens when they come here to the courthouse and what it's like to be a bailiff and how things are handled. So I'm doing my best to get information firsthand from them to help us in our decision-making. So we have a number of meetings coming up. We have this afternoon our combined PHHS Local Mental Health Advisory and the PHHS Advisory Council. We have our Public Health and Human Services Board next Tuesday, along with Committee of the Whole. Board of Adjustment and Planning Commission was switched to next Wednesday. And then we have both Highway Advisory and also our Airport Advisory Commission coming up next Thursday. So a busy time of the month. We have important recognition of staff. Andrew Dahlstrom at our recycling center, 1 year. Mitch Everson, Land Services, 13 years. It's amazing. Attorney Hicken, who is very busy and he had to leave, 16 years with us. Phil Larson, Soil and Water, 7 years. Christina Matson, PHHS and our ship coordinator, who's been with us for a year. Britta Moose, Law Enforcement, 6 years. Matt Nushheim, Highway Department, just does a great job. He's been here a year, doing so well. Brady, auditor.
Drum roll.
32. Auditor treasurer. How does that feel?
Well, the
We have
way
a
I
lot
look
of
at it-
employees that aren't 32 years old yet.
I just look at it as, I came here for a year, and I've renewed 32 times. 1 year at a time.
We're very happy that you did. Dagmar S. Smith, PHHS, Economic Assistance and Healthcare Programs, 7 years. Sean Smith, Highway Department, 1 year. And then our milestone anniversaries, Plamen Dimitrov, PHHS Fiscal Officer, 5 years, and Chris Schrupp, Law Enforcement, 10 years. So an amazing group of employees who have provided countless hours of service to the board and the community. And we thank you all very much. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. Is there support?
Support.
Thank you, Commissioner Starley. We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you all.